Welcome to this podcast, which is part of the Erasmus GENZ project, which aims to improve the competencies and skills of young people and youth workers on topics related to the environment and climate change. In this episode, we will explore the complex and urgent topic of climate migration. I'm your host, Stelios, and today joining us is Victoras Palligaras, an expert in environmental sciences and climate change.
Hello, Stelios. It's great to be here with you, and I'm really looking forward to discussing about climate migration.
The pleasure is mine. Let's dive into today's podcast. Let's start by defining climate migration. How is it different from other forms of migration, and what factors contribute to people being forced to leave their homes?
So climate migration is the form of migration that is caused by environmental and climate factors. For example, I'm living in a country that is that is surrounded by coastline, and the sea level increases, and I need to leave my house. So this is called climate migration.
Nice. Can you share some examples of regions or communities that are already experiencing significant climate-induced migration?
Yes, of course. Especially countries from Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, the Philippines, Bangladesh. These are countries that are very vulnerable to climate change and to extreme weather phenomena, such as extreme rainfall, high precipitation rates. And because they are very poor countries, they are not able to adapt to climate change needs, and their infrastructure is very insufficient. Therefore, these people have to leave their homes and migrate to another place.
Beyond statistics, climate migration involves real people with compelling stories. Can you shed light on some personal experiences or stories that highlight the human side of climate migration?
Yes, of course. We're in Cyprus right now, so we have a flow of refugees and people coming from Africa, from Asia. And the stories that I've heard are terrible. I mean, people are losing their houses either because they were destroyed from extreme weather phenomena, or because they can no longer live in their places because the soil is too dry due to droughts. And they're basically refugees, such as war refugees, but these are for climate reasons that they have to move. And they don't have any other option.
To be honest, I didn't know about that, so it's interesting for me as well. Climate migration is a global issue then. How do the actions of one region or country impact others, and what responsibilities do nations have in addressing this challenge?
So yeah, this is a global issue, but it's caused by the richer countries that produce more greenhouse gas emissions, and the effects are more visible in the poorer countries that don't have the infrastructure to hold the extreme weather phenomena. So, for example, the United States and the European countries, they are the ones responsible for climate change because of their greenhouse gas emissions, but they are rich countries, so they have the infrastructure to withstand extreme weather phenomena. On the other hand, poor countries in Africa, for example, or in the Caribbean, for example, that are often hit by hurricanes, they don't have the infrastructure because they don't have the money. So people lose their houses, their livelihoods, and they are forced to migrate. So they are paying the debt of the rich countries that are causing their problem. So there is a problem of justice here.
What are some of the challenges faced by migrants and the host communities, and what innovative solutions are emerging to address the challenges?
So one example of a challenge that climate migrants face is racism. In many host countries, when migrants arrive there, they're not welcomed, not because people are racist, it's just because they believe that they don't have the capacity to have more people into their communities. So this is another problem by the host country. The host country maybe doesn't have the infrastructure to host all of these people. They don't have the necessary work places. There are no regulations on how to integrate these peoples in their community. But on the other hand, this is also an opportunity for sharing best practices with people that already experienced climate change, and they can help the host countries to adapt to these changes with the practices that they are bringing. So exchanging knowledge and also accepting the climate refugees will help to build more strong communities.
talking about actions and what we can do, how can governments and international organizations formulate effective policies to address climate migration? And what role can advocacy play in driving positive change towards this direction?
Yeah, the governments are the ones that have the power to make changes and do actions in many fronts. For example, first in climate adaptation, because climate change is already happening, it's an ongoing crisis. So they need to find ways and policies to adapt to the changes. Some of them will be to already abandon communities that are very close to the coastline and move them elsewhere before disaster comes. Or maybe another adaptation measure would be to create more resilient communities. For example, coastline areas to be built on a higher ground, or increase the height of the houses so that they are not affected by by the sea level rise. And on the other hand, they can also contribute to climate change mitigation, which is basically reducing greenhouse gas emissions by using renewable energy, more sustainable mobilities, and also providing more sustainable life choices to people.
Thank you, Victor. As far as I can understand, it's a bit complex issue involving a lot of factors, let's say. So climate migration intersects with issues of justice and equity. How do social, economic, and political factors influence who is most affected by climate change and migration?
Yeah, so we are going kind of back and closing with the discussion that we had in the beginning that talks about who is responsible for climate change and who should be held accountable, which is the rich countries. But the effects are more visible in the poor countries. So what should happen in order to promote justice and equity is for rich countries to give money to these poorer countries to help them build sustainable infrastructure and withstand climate change. So, and this is also a problem in the negotiations in the COP. COP is it's a huge assembly of governments that are discussing about climate change policies and regulations. And this is where the heat comes out of these discussions, because the rich countries have to pay money to the poor countries. That's why we don't really have very strong regulations until this point.
So we need a bit of a teamwork.
Exactly. Teamwork is key, and also solidarity with the people that are losing their livelihoods because of climate change.
Communities also facing climate migration are also demonstrating resilience and adaptation. Can you share some examples of how communities are taking a lead in adapting to changing environment and conditions?
Yes, of course. So one famous way is to rely on crops that are basically that are adaptive to climate change. For example, if you are living in an area that doesn't have a lot of rainfall, then there are some crops that still grow there. So when they move to another country, they can give this expertise and this knowledge to grow these crops into the other countries as well. Especially now that because of climate change, new areas will open up that were not available to us up until today. For example, Siberia, that had permafrost, and now this frost is melting. There are going to be new fields for agriculture. So if we plant crops that are resilient to climate change in these areas, then we're going to build more resilient communities.
Interesting. Let's go back to how we can make this change happen. And we are talking about attitudes. So education and awareness are crucial in addressing this climate migration. How can we ensure that people, especially in vulnerable regions, are informed and properly equipped to cope with climate change?
So yeah, as you've mentioned, education is key, and also investment into young people and giving them power, knowledge, and competences, as well as skills to withstand climate change effects, such as this podcast that we are doing today, for example. It will be very useful for younger people and also for the general public as well, in order to understand the effects of climate change and also know the ways in order to adapt to it.
So technology and innovation plays a significant role in addressing climate-related changes. How can advancements in technology can support in preventing climate migration and assisting those who are already displaced?
Yeah, so as you've mentioned, there is kind of a two-way. It's the long term, so you can use technology to model the changes that are going to happen in a specific area. For example, the weather patterns, the droughts, or how often they will occur, and the effect on the soil, for example, of that area. So this is one application of technology. And in the short term, when it comes to emergency situations, for example, flash floods or extreme weather rainfall, you can use it as you can use technology for emergency responses and help to save people that are in danger.
And I can say that young people are often at the forefront, let's say, of this climate activism. How can the youth contribute to addressing climate migration, and what role can they play in advocating for this change?
Yeah, so younger people are the ones that are going to be mostly affected by climate change because they are young, they have a lot of years ahead of them to face climate change. And their role is to educate themselves and then do activism in order to force governments to take measures against climate change. This is what they should do.
Thank you, Victoras, for shedding light on the intricate web of climate migration. Before we wrap up, what's one key takeaway you would like our listeners to remember, like a key message for them?
Just for them to understand that climate migration is a global issue and it's an interconnected issue that addresses both societies and economies and the environment as well. So we need holistic approaches and solidarity in order to be able to adapt and try to make it beneficial for us as well. This is the key takeaway.
Thank you, Victoras, and thank you everyone for being with us today. That concludes today's episode of the GENZ podcast. Thank you for joining us on this important exploration of climate migration. Remember, understanding and empathy are the first steps toward a positive change.
Thank you, Stelios.